Okay, so I haven't done a video, well, I haven't done one for ages, like a year or something. I posted one from 2020 August about parasitical consciousness, and it was powerful for me to be able to share that information around healing yourself. So I want to kind of continue to evolve into that message. But today the energy seems to keep coming up through the conversations I'm having, and the messages that I'm getting through spirit are very much related to really connecting in with the heart. Obviously, that's people say that a lot, but let's really work out what that means. So when we are living our lives in this beautiful reality that we live in, even though it probably doesn't always feel beautiful, but that's just the way that it is at the moment, we are navigating often with our mind. So we're often navigating, and especially more left-brained in the general consensus. I'm very right-brained. I was born in Solomon Islands for the first 5 years of my life, and therefore I had an exceptionally feminine first 5 years of my life, and so I was very right-brained. I don't know why this is my right brain. So I was very right-brained, and when I moved to Australia, it was a huge shock for my system. I couldn't cognise the rules and the regulations that existed in our reality, and I still find that that just doesn't really compute. I don't work that way, and even if I try, I have a real difficult time in maintaining the order, because I'm very right-brained, so the order is different. I'm very holistic and I feel a lot, but I don't necessarily, I've had to work really hard and do a lot of writing and spend a lot of time really transferring that right brain over to the left, and then I'm able to sort of balance the hemispheres of the brain. So right brain is very feeling, it's very intuitive, it's abstract. So a lot of my artwork was very abstract, and it felt really right for me to do abstract work. And then sometimes I wanted to try to really push into more symbolic and more visually direct, but I found that where I actually flowed and felt the best in my own truth was when I was doing abstract work, because it's what I see every time I shut my eyes. I see colors moving through, and I see continual paintings evolving. Like, that's just how when I close my eyes, how I usually see. I mean, I also have other ways of seeing, but that tends to be the default of my third eye, I guess, or my experience of vision from within myself. So I guess the right side of the brain being very intuitive, expressive, feminine, creative, multi-dimensional awareness, but not necessarily in a categorized sense. Just, you don't always realize you're just sort of jumping into different ways of being. And people around me, because Australia is very more left brain, I'm sure it would have been frustrating at times, being a friend of mine or having me, because I sort of, and maybe rewarding in some other ways. I don't want to put myself entirely down, but I'm sure it would have been frustrating. But the left brain is obviously needed so we can, navigate reality. We can organize ourselves. I've got a Capricorn, I'm a Capricorn energy, so I have that groundedness, and so that left brain can be developed and is about organizing and kind of categorizing and creating labels, and all of these things are part of our experience. But when we're predominantly left-brained and we don't really know how to be in our feeling, and especially in our heart energy, we can start to project a sense of happiness or joy from a mind projection. So for example, if you're very left-brained and someone says, "How are you today?" and you say, "I'm fine," and then you smile and you look like you're doing really well, but maybe you've had a really bad day, but you don't feel that there's any place for that emotion to be expressed in that conversation, because you feel it's better to fit into the label of being fine. So you then become fine. You categorize yourself and you navigate through being fine. So is that actually good for us in our society? Is that really serving us? I mean, I don't want people to flip out of the blue and be like, "I'm not fine," and just be going like that. But it's more just like, we have been so conditioned to we've been so conditioned to respond on conditions. And we have felt, and then we start to, then that becomes a more limiting reality, because then we start feeling that that's the only way that we're allowed to communicate. And as a right brain person, I just feel like I can help people sort of maybe loosen up and become more comfortable with who they are as a being. More, not so much, I'm not the expert of anyone else's persona. I'm not even the expert of my own persona at times, but I just mean in terms of really truly coming into that feeling space and learning how to flow. And I think there's a couple of things that have really helped, well, not helped me because I was already very right brain, but helped me express myself the way that I felt language coming through me. And that's through dance. Dancing is a huge part of me, and you know, ever since I was young, but I've probably really stepped into going to dance classes and things like that when I was maybe 18, and I just committed totally to trying to learn. But the problem is I had no ability to follow a dance class linearly. So I could repetitively see the dance teacher teaching you the moves, and everyone around me would be like, bam, bam, bam. They'd just be like getting these moves. And I was like, I'm doing the opposite moves. My brain can't categorize the moves enough to learn it. It all comes across all at once, and I don't really know how to pick up on the details. So what I found for me was that I was more of a freestyle person. So I'd learn the moves, and I'd probably look like the worst dancer in the class, unless it was the type of teacher that really knew how to bring people in a collective energy together, whereas not all dance teachers are able to do that. They're just so trained to be in their left brain. They're just teaching routines. There have been maybe 2 teachers in my life as dancers that were just so good. They understood the collective energy and they understood the feeling. So even if I didn't get the moves, I was able to at least dance and be in it, and I could learn it quicker. I found it was easier for me to attune to it because it was a collective mind energy rather than it being just someone who's teaching a routine that they've made up, you know, in days leading up for their classes because it's their job. So dance has been a big part of that. And for me, language comes through movements, and movements are like what we perceive as dance. And a lot, for me, I'd go out clubbing and I would use that opportunity to go out clubbing to just dance. And, you know, there was a point where I got sick of alcohol and I just wasn't interested in, because I found it got in the way of me and me expressing myself. It actually inhibited me. It gave me the illusion that maybe I was comfortable, but I wasn't comfortable at all. I was way more comfortable not drinking and actually just practicing dance every weekend at clubs and things like that, and just going out and having water all night and coming home and feeling like I'd worked out, I had a really good time. So the reason I'm bringing up dance is because it's like that abstract thing, you know, it's like at first the dance movements were really abstract, but then I'd find the way in which that information that I was observing would become a body wisdom. And a body wisdom, it's like a feeling wisdom. And so for me, I'm comfortable dancing in whatever way and expressing myself. But back then, probably I would maybe regulate my persona in between that. And then when I'd go to dance, I would let it all out, because I was like, this is the time I can shine, and I don't have to use physical words, but I'm using words in it or language in a different way. So, and painting as well. Painting was one of those, you know, a big part of me stepping into artwork was letting go of what I was supposed to be, because remember, I moved from Solomon Islands to Australia and I suddenly felt very small, and I suddenly realized I wasn't allowed to stand out, and so I had to shrink and try to make myself invisible to cope with the amount of complex rules that my brain could not cognitize. And still throughout my whole, you know, young years, I still didn't really understand the difference I had, because, you know, I wasn't aware that that was what was occurring. Now I've done a lot of work on myself. I can look back and see that there was a major trauma at 5 or 6 when I moved to Australia, and how confronting that was. And you kind of see that in a lot of people. I'm not necessarily an immigrant. My parents are originally from Australia, but I can see that in people who have moved to Australia at a young age or even older. They really struggle with the culture because of the differences in the way that the brain's working. Just like, because we've all got our own references of what is, you know, healthy and normal and expressive communication. And then I find Australia sometimes to be quite stifled at points not on anyone in particular, just because it's just got its own energy and it's got its own thing, and it can just be very confronting when you are from a totally different place, especially a place where I was around tribal islanders, and I was being taken care of by my beautiful carer. Well, I had two, but Melody and Priscilla, and they would have been English given names, but Melody was like my mum, you know. She was so loving and unconditional, and I was allowed, and in Solomon Islands, and I'm sure it's in a lot of island places and a lot of tribal places, they look at children like gods. Like they really cherish the child energy. They absolutely idolize children. They absolutely respect and just are so in awe of children. So as a child, I was idolized, but not in a fame sense, or, you know, not in an unhealthy sense, in a genuine purity. I was seen as pure and I was experienced as pure, and it wasn't from a left brain capacity where you might think this is what purity is. It was a heart wisdom. And so I experienced that heart wisdom on a very deep level, and I realize now I've integrated that as a part of my way of life, and I'm confident in who I am now. You know, it took me a long time to work on myself and embody this heart wisdom. It was a lot to live up to, because my child self wanted to come through, but I also had to learn how to find a language, and I had to do a lot of writing, as I said before, to learn how to develop the left side of my brain. So I'd have the repertoire of like a palette that was large enough to be able to express the amount of feeling that was inside of me. So you know, obviously dance is a part of that movement. Even me, I can't even help it. I watch my videos and I always laugh at myself because I move my hands around, and I just can't help it. I feel the language coming through my body and through my voice, and it just becomes such a big part of me coming back to who I truly am, you know, and moving away from needing to be small anymore, and actually expressing my loving connection with life, which is through, you know, we all have our own way to express that. And for me, it's through language of dance, language of art, the language of writing, the language of, you know, hugs, or the language, just touch, all of those things that are really important. So a lot of people who've experienced a large amount of trauma and haven't had that reference of the first 5 years that I've had, where I really do know what unconditional love is, and I really do know what a holistic understanding of what it is to be a child in an absolute reverence and purity, because all children are pure and all children are absolutely beautiful, regardless of past lifetimes that they've come in with in some of those traumas. They are a pure aspect of the consciousness of the whole, and they show us our true natures, and they show us, and when you think of what a child doesn't have the experience or the bandwidths of frequency. So when you do something like, you know, that hurts a child or is upsetting to a child as an adult, you shatter their world in some ways. But then there's also this insane resilience because of the inner child ability to transmute all darkness. But what we have to realize is that child energy doesn't have the experience and doesn't have all the little fragments of bandwidths yet, because they haven't had any experience in terms of developmental parts of the brain. So when you impact a child negatively, you are actually you are shattering their ability to find any cognizance in what they perceive as a loving environment. They want to love. That's their energy, is about love. It's about sharing. It's about connection. They're trying to develop their own sense of self, yeah, but they are in that unity consciousness. So that's a really important part to integrate in our own being in the here and now. If we have child trauma, and I always talk about trauma, but it's such an important topic to talk about, because everywhere I turn, I'm seeing people who are traumatized, who think they're arguing about something that seems relevant to the here and now narrative, but they're actually really, there's something there that is wounded, and they don't know how to express themselves, and they feel it's about a specific narrative, but they haven't gone deep enough to go into that into those experiences to release them, so they can always resource that inner child that transforms and purifies all of the confusion or all of the overthinking, or so we can get into our heart space more directly. So art for me, abstract art, dance, spending time in nature, being around people who are more open or creative or expressive, have always been a part of me finding a sense of balance. The ocean's continuously changing. The ocean really does show us the feminine, the soft, the right brain. How you could go to the same beach 3 times a day, and every time you go there, it'll be completely different. The tide will be at a different spot. The sand will be moved in a different way. There'll be sudden sticks. You can be there one day and it's clear and it's just shells, and the next day it's like branches and sticks everywhere. So you really can never predict what that abstract or that right side of the brain can offer you, because it is actually continuously in a holistic flux and flow of its own expression of being. And where I see a lot of people have issues is that they are strategizing with their head, and they're holding their identity very clearly, because if you work at a job 5 days a week for 20 years, you think you're that job, and you've identified with your left brain, and someone says, what do you do? And you might not be doing it right then and there, but you say, I'm a builder, or I'm a writer. And you kind of go past that. You're like, well, are you writing right now? Because that's what the feminine is like, what are you doing? Who are you? What is your beingness? We are called human beings, not human doings. And human beings are beings that are in the feminine, expressing that feminine consciousness. And then that then becomes a natural progression where a doing starts to occur. So I don't even know sometimes before I'm about to dance. A song might come on, or something might happen, and all of a sudden I start dancing. I feel the energy, I'm being in the energy, and then the energy naturally takes itself on its own expression, and I feel that body wisdom start to come into play. And I'm 37 now, and it's taken me like a long time to learn how to bring this language in a way that could benefit anyone else, because I struggled a lot in this reality, and that's been part of my journey to develop my left side of the brain and cognizance between the 2 hemispheres of the brain, because I experienced a confusion when moving to Australia, and then levels of trauma from that point. Once moving to Australia, there was a lot of trauma. It was amplified as a result of because I was so right-brained, and I was open. I was like a really open being, and then all of a sudden I had to shut down, and then I had to keep learning really hard lessons. But I was always really open, even though I was like always trying to like disguise myself, but I was just wide open. I was wearing my heart on my sleeve, as they say. So after doing so much self-healing, because I think self-healing alchemy is a huge part of our journeys in the here and now, we really do need to heal our inner child energies if we want to have our heart more open. And we really do have to honor, and healing our inner child isn't scolding our inner child. Healing our inner child is about sitting with all of the emotions and the wounds that have been projected onto this child, because the child is pure and perfect as it is. And allow yourself not to judge that child, and allow that projection to start to clear away, so the child can actually be seen through the expression of our being, and that can be experienced as a heart wisdom, because we start to trust in what we enjoy rather than just doing things out of obligation. The left brain is very obligation. You have rules, you have regulations, you have ways to do things, and it's an amazing tool. But if you live in your left brain and you don't connect to the right side of the brain, and you're not connecting and you're not opening up to your heart, you won't really know who you are, even though you think you know who you are. In terms of body wisdom, it could, through repetition, you do learn a body wisdom, but is it actually coming from a sense of spontaneity from your spirit, or is it a conditioning that's sort of come from the multiple repetitious experiences that might have been positive or negative, depending on whatever it is that you're experiencing? Is that why you think you know who you are? So the mind polarizes. So everything you think for everything you think forward, like kind of the way you're thinking, you're always thinking like boom, boom, boom. You're actually throwing a thought, which is like a shadow aspect or a polarity, back behind you. So every time you make a judgment isn't bad, because we have to make judgments to live in our reality. We have to make situational judgments, or judgments to know what is right for us, and those are part of us moving forward. But when we live in a state of continual mind where we're just judging, and we are wounded on the inside, but we're not dealing with the wounding, and our judgments come from a wounding without us understanding that, we will be throwing out judgments forward and throwing them back, and not realizing we are actually creating a polarized, it's like a bridge or an arc. We're creating narratives through ourselves through those judgments, which is why when you look at a lot of, the Buddhist teachings, and you look at other teachings, they try to help people use the mind as a tool and come into the heart space and come into feeling. Like a lot of the time, my perception around what people perceive as meditation is because more people are left brain. So when they call it a meditation and they go and sit and feel, they're feeling for maybe their 20 minutes of their day, they're really in their feeling, and the rest of the day they're in their mind. For me, I'm feeling all the time. I feel like I'm constantly flowing with things. So sometimes I have to do the opposite. I've got to try to find my way into the left brain. So I've got to work kind of hard to try to get structure in place and get myself writing or finishing something. I start things and then move on, and I'm already doing 5 other activities, and I'm enjoying all of these activities by being in the now. I'm just flowing, but that can be quite frustrating because it's quite abstract way of living. So that's been part of my journey of, trying to balance those parts of myself. And I guess when we're talking about polarity of the mind, so everything you think, so when you're thinking black, you're throwing back white. When you're thinking white, you're throwing back black. When you're thinking, red, you're throwing back green. If you look at the color circle, there's always part of reality in terms of thinking. There's constant polarity, and it gives us this rainbow arc of experience, which is amazing. But it's when we identify so much with the mind and our judgments, the way we're thinking, and we don't listen. Because listening is half of communication. We think that communication is all talking in the West, and actually half of communication is silence and listening. And so it's a really important part to have that kind of awareness around like what it is to truly be in communication, union. What is it to be in union? You have to listen. You have to be present and actually want to, and have your heart open. You can't be your mind can't be ready to say something. I mean, that happens when you're really in your flow and you've integrated the left and right hemispheres of the brain and you're in your heart energy. Sometimes you just find things come out in ways that you wouldn't have normally navigated before that. But in terms of the general consensus of the population, half of communication is silence, and half of communication is listening to, like before I do writing, it really, sometimes if I get a bit stuck and I'm trying to find a way into getting into a really deep flow, I realize I just need to sit there and close my eyes and receive and be in the feminine and just close my eyes and listen to the wind, or listen to the car that drives past, or listen to my dog snoring, whatever happens to be present in that environment. And then I start to draw like a quality or a qualitative experience from that, and then that gives me a body wisdom where I'm able to then go, and then my mind can then focus into an activity. So there's lots of different ways in which we can navigate the brain and the mind and the self. But I guess the polarity is something that I see a lot in terms of our culture getting stuck. So for example, I see really beautiful beings who are doing self-healing, and they're still not comfortable with who they truly feel themselves to be in the here and now. And so when you ask them how they are, they're like, I'm fine, I'm going great, and it's all this left brain talk, but it feels like an imposter kind of energy, because it's not necessary. When you're someone who's very psychically aware and you see very clearly with your psychic vision and you feel with your heart, you can feel it's not true, even though to them it's true. It becomes a truth to them because that's how they've learnt to condition and survive within an environment where people have maybe been unfair to them, or maybe they've had really difficult a difficult time, wanting, because the vulnerability isn't really, we don't really see vulnerability as a strength often in the West. Like, I'm sure there's lots of amazing beings who do see that and they understand that on a deep level, but on a general consensus in terms of the culture, and coming from the outside in, the feeling isn't, it's sort of seen as a weakness, or seen as you're so over emotional, or, especially because I'm a highly sensitive person and I'm feeling so deeply. So I'm open. So when someone says something that feels really not right for me, it can feel like it hurts me physically. But I've had to learn how to be very resilient and somehow keep clearing and keep remaining that loving awareness, in the here and now. And that's taken a lot of practice and a lot of clearing on my behalf. So that, because it's been my journey to overcome a lot of karmic narratives that no longer served me after a point, once I started to realize who I truly was. And it was also a lot of things that were projected onto me. So when you're very feeling based and very in the feminine, when people aren't comfortable in their masculine or their feminine, they tend to project onto you as being something in that moment. And what they don't realize is, with their mind, they're creating a snapshot of you and their projection of you in that moment, and then they think that that's the truth because they're thinking. But if you come back into the heart, you understand that it's holistic. It's just a snapshot. It's cool. We all have snapshots. My thoughts are like snapshots. They're like on your phone. You take a little snapshot, a literal moment in time, but it can be taken out of context, and it can be identified with so much that we lose perspective and we lose heart. And I feel like the more that we rely on the brain, on the mind in this time, the more illogical reality becomes. Not so much in terms of a creative abstract feeling. I more mean it just becomes absurd. It becomes absolutely absurd. And so polarizing, whenever we have a polarized judgment and we don't realize we're flicking it behind us at the same time, we're just doing this all the time when we think. We are actually creating narratives for ourselves that entrap us and entangle us into confusion about and distraction from being in the here and now. And the feminine consciousness, and the mind isn't a negative thing, it's a tool. And when you understand it's a tool, you don't have to identify with the tool. It's like a hammer, you know why you're using it. But if you're using it, it's the only tool all the time, I don't know how you would build a house with just a hammer. You would need other tools. So it's like learning to use your mind as a tool, no matter what that tool happens to be, because the mind can be very expensive if we know we're working with it as a tool. And it can be very, very powerful tool. But when we over-identify with it, we become rigid in our mindset, and we usually become kind of unhappy, or we feel resentful, or we feel really stifled, and we start to try to control things too much. And we try to use our minds to manipulate things without even realizing that we're starting to go out of alignment with our heart energy. The feminine energy is very much about feeling and being in the here and now. The feminine energy is the now. For me, I see the mind as an illusion and the feeling as a truth. That might not be, but I'm going to explain, it might not be for everyone how they see it, but that's how I help myself grasp what is happening. So the mind can create any thought. I can just suddenly go, I am an eagle right now. And that is true. There is parts of me in this collective cosmos, multidimensional self, I'm sure have an eagle. I might be an eagle in other lifetimes. I am multidimensional. But if you only identify with the thought, then you've sort of lost you've lost the point of why you even have the thought in the first place. The point of this life is not to just be thinking thoughts and navigating purely from the mind. The point of this experience is to build a body wisdom that is through your own unique experience of the here and now. And that's what the feminine consciousness is. Growing up in the Solomon Islands, being around that collective consciousness, when I look at what that was for me and identify it with my left side of my brain to communicate that to you guys, I recognize that there was no need for identity other than the mother-father roles, which happen to be, it's like a family tree energy. There's a family connection, but it's not they're not identified with what they perceive themselves to be doing. So if they're cooking, they're not saying, I'm a cook. They're just cooking because the community needs food. You know, everything's by feeling and by natural symbiotic connection. So it's a very different kind of way to operate compared to the West. We get up by an alarm. We have to psych ourselves up to get to work. You know, then we identify with our perception of what work is for us. And we get polarized continuously through whoever we happen to deal with at work, because we're in this rigidity, which some people, you know, thrive within, and they can do really well. And if they love their job and they're really happy and they've got the freedom and they've got a great boss, or they're their own person and they've created their own business or whatnot. But a lot of people are living in a fragment of who they truly are. And then on some level, there's a settling in that, or there's an over-identification in that. And there's a concern for me in regards to that, because it means that you're not experiencing the true nature of your being and why you came here on this planet to, you know, to live, is to build body wisdom, to experience, to live in the here and now. And the feminine consciousness is about truly experiencing in the here and now. So that feeling is truth. That feeling will come through you, and a lot of the time people try to use their mind to negate it. They go, I'm feeling really sad, and they think they've put it in a category or a box, but what they've done is they've just avoided actually sitting with it. Feeling doesn't require you to do anything, even though you think in some ways it can push you into action. So that's one way in which feeling can manifest. But I'm talking about feeling itself is about acceptance and surrender and being in the here and now. So, and a lot of the time we resist. We don't know that we're resisting the here and now. Like, you know, you hear people talk about be in the now, be in the now. But the reason why we resist at times being in the now, because we don't mentally realize that that feeling is actually showing us a truth. It's showing us something. When you stand at the edge of the ocean, you know how I said, you know, you could go 3 times a day and it would be completely different. Say you're standing there and you've got your feet in the water and it's wild. Do you judge the ocean for being disgusting or annoying, or that ocean is pissing me off, you know, it's moving around too much? Like, yes, we can have those thoughts. They're snapshots in time. But do we over-identify with those thoughts while we're at the ocean? Generally not. We don't. We let it all go. We just have we might have the thoughts initially, and then eventually we're just in the feeling. We're experiencing the water moving. It's cold. Oh my God, got to move out of here. And then suddenly the water comes up and gets all over your pants and you're like, oh, I'm cold now. But then you're like, you just got sand everywhere. There's all these different experiences that you can't define because you're so in it. You're so in the experience of it. And that's how I feel when I dance. That's how I feel when I paint abstract. That is how I feel when I get into a really deep channeling kind of flow with writing. There are certain types of writing that are way more left-brained, and then there's some types of writing for me, like poetry and things, are more right-brained. I feel them and then they come through, and I find myself just can't even help it, just writing words. So I guess what I wanted to share was the difference between the heart wisdom and the mind wisdom. And both of them are really important together. They're really important. The left and the right brain hemispheres need to be integrated. And if we have trauma, often we have a disconnection of the cognizance of the brain hemispheres. And it's really important to understand where you are most comfortable leaning into. So you can start to, it's like yoga. You know, yoga is literally putting you into positions that initially at some points feel uncomfortable, but you hold that position, so then you learn to flow into it. And at first it's really hard because you can feel certain parts of your body are rigid and they hurt, and you're not pushing it past the limit, but you're just feeling it, and you're being present with how uncomfortable it feels. And you know, when you see someone who's practiced yoga for many, many years, you can see they are comfortable in their body because they've had this beautiful practice of mind and heart in oneness through this continual, you know, they're moving through their perceived limitations. You know, some people take 10 years to do a headstand, and you know, that 10 years could feel quite frustrating mentally, but after a while it would become a practice and it would start to just flow. For me, dancing was the same. At first it was frustrating because I couldn't express the dance or the language that was coming through my body in the way that I really wanted to, and I had to learn how to build that body wisdom to learn how to connect to that that movement, and it's like when we first learn language as children. You know, at first we learn the ABCs, and then we keep learning letters, and then we learn how to spell, and we start to develop that part of our brain. Like for me, dance was the exact same thing. I had to learn how to coordinate and balance the way that I was moving or the way that I was doing things. And you know, sometimes that's through looking in the mirror and dancing in front of the mirror. You can see where if you're putting your arms up and you don't realize, you think you got it straight, but your arms are like kind of like that. It can make it's that left side of the brain is able to critically go, oh, okay, let's try to balance this. But you're just using your mind as a tool. You're not using your mind to judge everything that you do. You're trying to assess the balance. That's what the mind is really. When it does its best is when we learn how to find the middle road, and we learn how to see the polarity in you know, these two different things, and we learn how to use the mind to scoot through the middle rather than getting over identified with this side or this side, the left and the right, or the right and the left, or whatever you want to call it, the black and the white and the black, the opposing energies. Rather than getting stuck into those, you start to understand that those exist perfectly the way they do, and your role is to find a middle road to travel down as a, you know, and that's part of learning how to flow and be, you know, human beings. When we learn how to flow and be, we can use the mind as a tool without identifying ourselves as the mind. And I remember, I think that's Sadhguru who'd said, you know, I am not my body, I am not my mind, as a meditation. You know, I am not my body, I'm not even my mind. I am not my body, I'm not even my mind. So we're not any of these things, but when but we can enjoy the expression of these things, and we can enjoy the tools that we've been given through the anchoring of spirit into this physical body, nature, you know, technology that we have, which is natural and in sync with the solar, you know, the solar and the lunar aspects. We've got all these opposing things that are continuously showing us, you know, we've got day and night, and then depending on where we are in our seasons, you know, night might be longer, so we're learning how to be more in the silence and the listening and the presence and the inner being and the beingness. And then when we are, you know, in the daytime, we're doing and we're getting more done, and we're in the masculine, and we're expressing ourselves, we're talking more, we're sort of in a role in a different way. So I guess I don't really know, you know, hopefully this video has conveyed the feeling and the thought in a balanced way as best I possibly can. But I really just notice so many people suffering as a result of their mind states, that they've over-identified with the so-called security of the mind. And then they don't allow themselves the present moment of feeling, and they don't even realize they're suppressing their feeling. And if we suppress our feeling for long enough, because energy, motion, emotion, you know, ocean, energy motion has a momentum. It's a magnetic energy, whereas the mind is more of an electrical current that takes you. Or even you can even see it as a train that stops at different stops, and each stop is a certain thought or outcome. You know, we're thinking an outcome when we're thinking of the mind. When we're thinking of emotion, or when we're feeling into emotion, we're feeling the ocean all around us. We're feeling ourselves as a sphere, and as a fluid, multi-dimensional, you know, being. And we have been designed with, you know, 2 hands, 2 legs, 2 feet. You know, like we've been designed perfectly through a geometry. A wisdom from the living presence of life, which you could call the cosmos or the universe or God, designed perfectly with 2 ears, you know, all of these things. We've got these polarities that are continuously existing. But if we only try to walk on one leg, eventually our body on the other side will waste away. Or, you know, if we only try to walk on the other leg, our body on the other side will waste away, or there might be issues in the hips that we can't learn to balance. And that's why the middle road and learning how to feel through the heart space is so important. And that's, you know, like I said at the beginning, the inner child energy, healing the inner child is so important to learning how to get rid of these projections that have been placed upon you from a young age, from other people's rigid mental structures that they obviously didn't even realize were causing damage as a result of their their polarity that they projected onto people or beings or themselves, or the expectations and, you know, obligations that people have, that they've placed on, you know, children. And our responsibility as we grow and become adults and start to live our own decision is meant to be self-healing. We're meant to self-heal. And I mean, I guess if we lived in a community like environment, like what I'd mentioned about Solomon Islands, the healing is literally a way of life. It's just continual. It's flow and tides, and it's currents, and it's being connected to the collective and learning how to you're constantly playing different roles. You're not just playing one role. You're a wave particle consciousness rather than an individual particle. And so the mind separates things. The mind, through each thought, is a separation. And that's part of our natural, that's what we do. We create separation with the mind, and then heart creates unification. So they're both valid, and they're both part of nature. One destroys, one unifies. One, activates the energy, and one closes down the energy. But if we are sitting in one more than the other, you can see why we would become very unbalanced. And kind of, if we have trauma that hasn't been resolved, we could actually then unaware, start to cause harm to other beings just through the things that we do and say, and have the idea or thought, or the belief system that you are a good person, therefore whatever you say or whatever you do is okay. But some of these patterns have been projected onto you, or onto that person since they were young, and so they wouldn't know the harm that it causes. And I think when we learn how to be in our heart, we actually feel things, and we start to we start to become out of this insensitive energy, a slight sensitivity is a beautiful thing. It feels like a curse, and I'm sure a lot of people who are watching and have had sensitivity would just hate it. It can be really hard, and especially when you're living in a very left-brained culture, because you will be seen as oversensitive. You're then categorized as oversensitive, so that's a negative thing. But what about all the beautiful? That's a polarized judgment that's been made upon a group of people. But what about all the beautiful things that what we perceive as oversensitive as a judgment on this end? What do they bring in? They bring in a sense of compassion. They bring in a sense of creativity. They bring in a sense of connection to people around them, and they make people feel more safe, because that safety comes from being able to express who you are, not being obligated to be a certain way. So we've got to really identify the tyrant in us, and we've got to identify the victim in us, and the sense the two extremes of the tyrant and the victim, and start to walk the middle road and start to actually become whole. And that's the other thing I was going to say too. There's all these projections that we have on things through our minds, and we project them outwardly we project these universal archetypal energies into the reality outwardly. For example, what we perceive as leaders, we call them the hero, and then all of a sudden they're the villain, and all of a sudden they're the victim, and then they're the hero, the villain, the victim. And it's sort of like a really negative trinity that we do, instead of integrating all of those aspects and realizing I can be the hero, victim, and villain in any moment in all three. But if I have full awareness and I can walk the middle road, and I won't need to cause harm, I won't need to create damage in somebody else's reality as a result of that confusion, that projection. And the mind projects, like I said, when we throw something out there, it goes back, and we get hooked back. We have things that come back at us later on in life through thought processes. So how many of you guys have been through experiences where you've had a judgment that might have been negative, or whatever you want to call it? It was not very nice. It came from a place of wounding within you. And then maybe 20 years later, you have the exact same experience that what you did to somebody else, or how you judge someone does it to you. And then you're able to see full circle what that felt like, because you have a body wisdom in it, rather than it just being a wounding that isn't complete or healed within itself. And then you're able to learn the full lesson. And that's what we do. We're all characters within this, we've got like, say this is a character here, and we've got a story arc. And, the character doesn't know what it's capable of. The character has these amazing gifts that are unmastered and unearthed within them. They don't have the body wisdom yet. And over at the end is where they actually live as a master in their own craft or skill or gift or whatever it is. And in between, you've got this huge mountain, or maybe there's a couple of mountains that goes in between. And that being has to go through that journey where they get to that middle point, and all the pressure comes upon them for them to actually push. It's like making lead into gold, but they don't know that that's exactly what's happening. And it's this alchemy that starts to occur where this pressure starts to come in, and it's really their own capability or possibility that is there on some level, on an external force to try to help them bring and transmute the lead to gold. And then as they, they might go through several mountains, and each time they're learning more about how to bring this gift in. Sometimes it takes years to be good at certain things, and people who have spent their, and I don't mean identifying with things mentally, but practicing something and continuously practicing it should become easier and easier, because you become more in the flow rather than just in your mind. And as you go through this story arc, you start to discover who you are. And that's where we're kind of all at in the collective evolution of this planet at the moment. We're sort of learning about who we are and what it is that we are really good at. But what is that? It's usually, for me, I say our greatest wounding is our greatest gift. But you have to be able, there's no use in it just staying as a wounding. You've got to transmute that wounding into your greatest gift, so you can actually live in the world as the master of whatever it is that you're bringing through from your soul purpose. So your greatest wounding is your greatest gift. And so for me, going through such a big healing journey, my greatest wounding was around a lot of trauma, and there was a lot of things that I really was challenged with. As I told you, even moving to Australia was very traumatic. And I'm just kind of realizing that's become my gift, because that love that I received as a child and was able to experience felt very upsetting when I moved to Australia, and very upsetting when, all of that occurred. But at the same time, I've now come full circle, and I go, oh, I see why I went through that now. I can now express this. I've finally developed all of these skills over many, many years, like dancing, art, language, through writing, etc. And then that's enabled me now to finally express the type of love that I felt as a child, that I knew I didn't really know I was capable of, maybe didn't know I was able to get to that place. But I genuinely know in myself now that I can finally be that loving being, regardless of what's happening in front of me. Not always, I'm not perfect, and I still am a human being, and I experience trauma, and I experience, levels of PTSD occasionally and things like that nowadays. But it's so different. It's so different because that I've learnt how to be loving as an adult in a way that honors my inner child, what I experience, and that then gives someone a safe place who might need that wants to come into their right brain. That becomes my gift. And so, everyone has these special things that they've been through, all these really horrific things that they've been through, but somehow they've become, if they're able to churn through the self-healing alchemy process, which I think is really important, which is why I always talk about self-healing, because it makes you accountable for your own gifts. You cannot step into your life path if you haven't stepped into your shadow. You'll just get tripped up every time you try to step into your life path if you haven't actually dealt with timelining your life and looking at all the little traumatic events or big traumatic events, or maybe you've got layers and layers of it. There are beings out there that have been through so much, and I look at them and I'm just so blown away, because they've somehow been able to get through that journey and transmuting it, and they have become a pillar of strength for other people around them. As a result of that, their greatest wounding becomes their greatest gift. So for me, that is it's going from a mind concept of something and moving into the heart wisdom, and then being able to live with both of them in balance and together. So yeah, I hope this makes sense. I can't always tell because I'm so in the right brain. I'm just feeling the whole thing and I'm seeing it so visually, and I genuinely don't always realize how I come across or anything like that. But I really want to support people to heal their inner child and do the self-healing work that is required so they can actually come into more of a balanced middle road perspective. And to be able to do that takes a long time. So it's not something that happens overnight. And you really have to be honest with yourself about where where you tend to lean more in, and then find ways to start to practice leaning the other way, so you can then eventually just come back into the middle and be able to hold yourself in that balance. And then, you know, that means you can just switch on whenever you need. If you need to step into the masculine and you need to step into talking and stepping into doing and action, you've got to make sure that you're really in alignment with the being and the feeling. And, you know, because you can't act, if you act outwardly without tuning into your own self, you are in an enslavement within your own belief systems, and you are acting out of alignment with your own inner truth. You have to identify where you feel, and people that are more left-brained will need to go into will need to do meditation or things that help them feel, doing abstract art processes, learning how to dance freestyle, or, you know, whatever it is, getting them out of their rigid ways. I had my dentist I went to recently, and she's, you know, very left-brained because she's a dentist and she has to be, and that's what she's really good at. But she was telling me, when she saw that I was an artist, she was like, oh my God, I can't wait to talk to you about this. And she starts asking me questions, and she's trying to do abstract art. And I was like, you just need to get rid of the critic, because if you're in the left brain, you're really in the critic. Your mind is judging before you even put any color on there. And how do you expect something to be good and perfect if you can't even feel comfortable, you know, using your body and moving and letting go of the judgments? You can't create abstract paintings from a very left brain perspective. You just have to let go of it all. You know, you have to let go of the critic. And for me, how that worked was I'd see the critic as a character in my own mind who was this kind of I saw this man in me. Everyone might have a different type of critic, and they're just like, at first they get too much power. So they're like, no, you don't do that, and that looks ugly, and oh, what are you doing that for? Why would you do that? And you just learn to quiet and turn the volume down on the critic, but only turn it up when you need the critic. So bring the left side of the brain in when you're at a point where you've finished doing the flow, and you're standing back and you're having a look and you're seeing how it works. Does the color works? Is the canvas, covered? Is there, does it need more color on this side? You start to then analyze it more, but you're using your mind as a tool, and you're not judging the painting as such, but you're just using your mind to navigate how the painting feels. Is there a balance? So you've been in your right side of the brain flowing and painting, and then you bring your left side of the brain and try to assess whether it's balanced for both those parts of your brains and for your own beingness. And then I'll bring the critic out when I'm finished. When I feel I'm finished a painting, I'll pull back, and the critic will kind of assess whether it is finished or not. Do I need to put varnish on it? Do I need to wire the painting? Do I need to sign the back? They're all my left side. That's my left side of the brain. My left side of the brain does a great job nowadays, and that helps me then finish things off and complete things and own, really get things organized. And then I've got to write an email to an art gallery and do this. That's the left side of the brain. The right side of the brain needs to be unharnessed and unaffected just like the left side of the brain. When the left side of the brain is more dominant, it needs to be able to do what it does, and the right side of the brain has to step back and allow that process. So I think it's just about, I'm just sharing these practices that I've had, and they don't have to necessarily be relatable to anyone really, but if they are, then that's awesome. I just want to help people identify where they are leaning more on this side rather than maybe balancing themselves out a little bit more. And how do we find that sense of balance? Through recognizing honestly where we're at, and where, and trauma is a huge part of that, identifying where we have trauma. If you were scolded for drawing when you were a child, and you were told that the painting was terrible, of course your inner critic is going to tell you that your painting is terrible every time. You've got to learn to retrain that part of your brain and say, that's not why I'm bringing my inner critic out. My inner critic is there to help me produce and complete this project. It isn't there to belittle me and make me feel lesser or down. It isn't there to try to make me seem like I'm fine when I'm not fine. That's dishonesty with self. And I'm not judging, it is just what it is. But it is an important thing to recognize when we're sort of in these different states of consciousness and where we are with them. And at least just have an awareness. It's not about taking action straight away. It's just sitting with yourself and learning how to be within your own self. Listening to yourself. Half of communication is listening, and that's the feminine. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. I just really appreciate you listening. And I'm just trying to think if there's anything else to add, but I'm really grateful for the time and energy that has been put into any of the videos that I've put out there. And even if there's not, I hope that I can just help one person connect more to who they truly are through the middle road. And also just stop stifling ourselves with perceptions and start to actually live in our human beingness, so we can then act out of that beingness rather than act first and then, just acting, just continuously doing. It's not a good way to live your life. It'll eventually burn you out some way or another, because anything that's out of balance with itself will eventually, if it swings this direction, it's going to eventually swing this direction. You can't expect it to stay on this tilt forever. It's going to, gravity, the way that physical reality manifests, is going to naturally. And if you can start to just, I'm trying to find a pendulum, but like if you're starting to find that sense of balance, and then you can start to then just see where you are in it, and then you just enjoy the process, and that movement is continual, and you're continuously finding that flow. So thank you very much. Really grateful for your time, and so many blessings your way. Lots of love.